Hello and welcome to episode 27 of Mjolnir the Movies. And I'm here with James. Hello, James.
Hello.
And Neil. Hello, Neil. In this transsexual special, no. Actually, Neil has been replaced for this particular episode because he's on holiday. And so we're here with Hanna. Hello to you, Hanna.
Hi.
Hi.
Well, thank you for allowing me to be on here. Unlike the outright. I appreciate that.
Because we're actually doing a particular favourite of Hannah's this week, which is The Witches. This is the 1990 film by Nicholas Roeg, a famous adaptation of the children's story by Roald Dahl, of course. And I think we ought to start with Roald Dahl, actually, because he's a very interesting writer. Have you read much Dahl, you two?
Oh yeah, I grew up with that as a kid.
Charlie and the Chocolate Factory.
Classic.
Yep.
BFG.
Yep. I personally regard him as the greatest children's writer of all time. He has this wonderful macabre quality to him that children, I think, just adore. This darkness in the, this dark humor that he has.
Yes. Yes.
I could do a lot of kind of spooky stuff for kids, but still suitable for kids.
Yeah, I remember the original Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory. There were a lot of people who said the Oompa Loompas were creepy.
Well, the Oompa Loompas originally in the book, they started off as black, and that caused a lot of controversy because, of course, they're more or less slaves of Willy Wonka. And, and he brought them from this place where they were eaten by scary creatures and so on, which is basically Africa. and they're set to work for him. This caused a bit of controversy, unsurprisingly enough. But here's the thing about Dahl. He has caused a lot of controversy because he really is one of us, actually. I don't know if you know this.
I didn't, but I just remembered another story of his that I absolutely loved growing up. It was Matilda.
Oh, yes. Yeah. Another one it's adapted to the TV. Or
yes.
Silver screen, I should say.
Yeah, they made a really cute movie with Danny DeVito. It was pretty funny. And the woman that they chose to play as the Trench Bull, she did kind of look like a tranny. I mean, I remember as a little girl, it was my sister's favorite movie, and we used to watch it all the time. And my mother, she saw it and she was like, "Is that a man?"
She was pretty big built.
Yeah.
Yeah. Now, Dahl, I saw this documentary by the BBC on Roald Dahl, and they were trying to pass him off as a Welshman. This is basically because he was born in Wales, and this is the BBC, and it doesn't matter about ancestry now, it matters about where you're born. And so suddenly he's Welsh, but actually, ethnically, he was 100% Norwegian. And we have to point this out. Although he had a very British sensibility in many ways, he sort of had both a Norwegian side to him and a British side to him as well. A lot of the authors that he liked were British. They were also surprisingly right-wing authors that he liked. So he liked people like Charles Dickens, Rudyard Kipling, William Makepeace Thackeray, and Frederick Marryat, and they're all right-wingers. They're all extremely right-wing. In fact, if they were around now, they would probably be accused of hate crimes. Particularly, Dickens, of course, was against philo-Semitism, shall we say.
I did not know that. Or actually, no, I shouldn't be surprised, because wasn't that character in Oliver Twist Fagin, I think?
That's right. And in fact, Neil and I, we covered that in an earlier episode of Mjolnir the Movies. Because we did David Lean's version of Oliver Twist, we had a look at that. Yes, absolutely. In fact, he doesn't have a name for the first half of the book. Fagin is just referred to as the Jew.
Doesn't get much more obvious than that.
No, not a lot of mystery to it.
Kipling, again, very much against philo-Semitism and very much proponent of the British Empire. Kipling, he wrote a very famous poem called Gehazi, which is basically about the Marconi scandal and the Jewish involvement in it, relating to a piece in the Old Testament, so kind of fusing the two together.
But couldn't you get away with saying that none of these people can be accused of racism because some of them lived in India, so they're just as Indian as any Indian?
Yes.
Because if you lived in India, that's it. You're now no longer British, apparently. Because it works the other way around, doesn't it?
Right. Well, the thing is, you see, he loved India. He really loved India, and he cared for India, but he was firmly and staunchly a white supremacist. People think that the two are necessarily opposites, but actually that's not really true.
Mm.
That's... When I was a kid, I used to love the Jungle Book too, so thanks, Rudyard Kipling.
Yeah. The William Makepeace Thackeray, interestingly, do you know where the word Sambo comes from?
Mm-mm.
I feel like you're going to tell
Fair.
me.
Yeah, Vanity Fair, William Makepeace Thackeray. It's a character in there called Sambo, and of course he's a black servant, and pretty much a caricature of a black servant he is as well. Although those kind of characters, they appeared quite regularly in works by very much mainstream established writers who one might think are quite liberal. Someone like Jules Verne, for example, also wrote such characters.
Oh, I'm pretty sure you know about this. They apparently pulled off Huckleberry Finn's off the shelves of the libraries in children's schools because it has the N-word in it.
Oh,
that's right. Yeah. They've actually
with a hard R.
Yeah, they've actually Baudelarized it, haven't they?
Yeah.
The Adventures of Tom Sawyer and Huckleberry Finn. Yeah.
So
so that it no longer contains that word. So this is what they, of course, say that the National Socialists in Germany did, which they did. Yeah. But aren't these people as bad then?
Well, look at this. You can't even listen to Dam Busters without a warning now front it.
That's right, just because the dog's called nigger.
And we're meant to believe that there'll be people lying on the floor, faint with shock and horror and harm from it.
Yeah.
Apparently, get this. So, at my university, somebody used to love H.P. Lovecraft, but now she realizes that she can't enjoy his work anymore because, in real life, he had a cat named Nigger Man.
Yeah, that's true, yeah. In fact, I think we talked about that when I was doing the podcast with Faust and Ann Sterzinger about Lovecraft, yeah. And actually, if you read his works in any case, they are absolutely 100% based on his racialism.
Yeah.
The fact is that things like The Shadow over Innsmouth, for example, that is absolutely his critique of miscegenation.
And it's funny that a lot of the kind of lefty types all loved it because they were all into all these pop culture things. They're all wearing Cthulhu t-shirts and saying how wonderful it was. It was getting really popular. And then all this stuff about his actual views in life came out and they all got really nervous and started to kind of shuffle on their feet and kind of back away from it for a while.
Now, the last of the authors that Roald Dahl was influenced by his earlier influences, which was Frederick Marryat. He actually collaborated with George Cruikshank. George Cruikshank is a very famous artist. He illustrated quite a number of Dickens's novels, including a very famous picture of Fagin. And he was absolutely 100% racialist as well. And Marryat, he designed the pictures for this very famous satire called The New Union Club, which Cruikshank then engraved. And I actually put that picture in one of the issues of Mjolnir magazine. I think it was issue 3, if I remember rightly, although it might not be, but I think it was issue 3 that I put that in. So there we go. That's a nice little link to Mjolnir magazine. There we go.
Buy the issue to find out that and more.
We've that's right. We've got from Roald Dahl to Mjolnir magazine in one fell swoop. There we go.
Showing the line of inheritance and legacy there.
Absolutely. And we'll come back to certain aspects of Roald Dahl's, shall we say, racialism in The Witches, because it's quite prominent. I don't know if you got that, but it is.
As a child, no, I did not.
No, of course, as a child, not. I mean, I wasn't a child when it came out, and I first saw it when it came out, but I didn't quite get the what he was driving at, shall we say. But we'll look at that a little later. Now, it's directed by Nicholas Roeg. Have you watched any of his other stuff, Nicholas Roeg? You must have watched, for example, The Man Who Fell to Earth, perhaps.
Mm-hmm.
And his first film was Performance, which was with Mick Jagger. It's a very famous film in Britain. I'm not so sure about in America, but it's an odd one, I'll be honest. Sort of about the life of a rock star, that kind of thing. But anyway, it seems to like casting rock stars, it would appear. I don't think that he's that great a director, I'll be honest. I don't know what you thought about him as a director in this film, The Witches. I thought that there were some decent things, but overall,
yeah, sort of TV movie level.
Yeah, I got that feeling to it as well.
Yeah, I think it's probably effective for a child because a child doesn't have your discerning eye when it comes to movies.
No, I usually, like, a 12-year-old's not going to talk about cinematography.
Yeah. No.
But this terrified you as a child, didn't it, Hannah?
Yeah. There was a scene in the beginning, and to this day, I still find it frightening. And it's where the grandmother is explaining to her grandson, to be wary of witches. And then she gives him a story from her own childhood and how she knew this little girl who was taken by a witch. And there's no special effects. There's not really anything, but whatever the director and the actors did, I found effective because it's just like this creepy old lady. And she notices this little girl who's just standing outside on her own. And now that I've taken psychology classes, that's what predators do in real life. They do look for the most vulnerable child they can find.
That's true. There is something very sinister about the film, isn't it? This idea of preying on children.
Well, that's...
Yeah.
I suppose the film's quite clever in a way that, and obviously the source material, where as a child it's scary for one reason, but as an adult, you've got another fear looking at it, the fear for what could happen to children. That's what you're looking at it and actually quite frightened of, because you're thinking, oh God, these children are all vulnerable from these predators.
Yeah. Obviously as an adult, you worry about a child being molested or murdered. And in the movie and in the book, the witch can just do some magic spell on you and you're just gone. And in the scene that I'm talking about, the little girl ends up being placed in her father's painting, and she spends her whole life in the painting.
Yeah, that's right. She grows old in the painting and everything. And this is the thing that I think is really stands out about Dahl's work, is that there's often an amount of cruelty to it, that things don't have happy endings for everyone.
No.
It's like the difference, if you like, between the sanitized fairy stories of Victorian England, which J.R. Tolkien absolutely hated, and the things that you get in Grimm's tales, and even Hans Christian Andersen to a degree, where there is terrible consequences and so on.
Yeah, like, for example, The Little Mermaid and the original fairy tale, she ends up being turned into sea foam at the end.
Yeah.
And of course, Disney gave her a happy ending, but...
Yeah, and this actually was something that Dahl was very critical of in the film, because the film and the book are very different. And the ending in particular is different. And Dahl hated the ending.
Yeah, because in the book, the boy remains a mouse. In the movie, the good witch comes and turns him back into a boy.
Yeah, and I'll be honest, I found that completely unbelievable, the ending of the film. I found that nonsense. Why would this witch, this younger witch, who's played by Jane Horrocks, why would she suddenly just turn good like that? That is not explored at all. It's just sort of thrown in there at the end.
Yeah, that was something that I found annoying as well, because she'd went along with everything so far, and she was the right-hand woman to this great evil as well.
Yeah, but in the story, as Hannah said, the boy remains a mouse. But it's even sort of more heartbreaking than that. I'll tell you what, this will really get you. And I shall read the bit 'cause I've got the extract here. And he, of course, remains a mouse for the rest of his life. And he asks how long a mouse lives. And his grandmother says, if you really want to know, she said, I'm afraid a mouse doesn't live for a very long time. How long, I asked. Well, an ordinary mouse only lives for about 3 years, she said. But you're not an ordinary mouse. You're a mouse person, and that's a very different matter. How different, I asked. How long does a mouse person live, Grandmama? Longer, she said, much longer. How much longer, I asked. A mouse person will almost certainly live for 3 times as long as an ordinary mouse, my grandmother said. About 9 years. Good, I cried. That's great. That's the best news I've ever had. Why do you say that, she asked, surprised. Because I would never want to live longer than you, I said. I couldn't stand being looked after by anybody else. There was a short silence. She had a way of fondling me behind the ears with the tip of her finger. It felt lovely. How old are you, Grandmama? I asked. I'm 86, she said. Will you live another 8 or 9 years? I might, she said, with a bit of luck. You've got to, I said, because by then I'll be a very old mouse and you'll be a very old grandmother. And soon after that, we'll both die together. That would be perfect, she said. I had a little doze after that. I just shut my eyes and thought of nothing and felt peace with the world. That is absolutely far more powerful than the garbage at the end of that film.
Yeah. I can imagine an audience getting teared up listening to that one. Especially here, if you had the narration from the actors properly, that would have been quite powerful.
Yeah.
For kids and adults.
Absolutely. And apparently they filmed that ending as well as.
Oh.
But went with the other.
Chickened out?
Yeah. Because, of course, Hollywood would never have accepted an ending like that.
It's a shame because that's the kind of ending that would have made it a real classic.
And it's an ending that would be more like Dahl. And so, as I say, that there's always sort of a bittersweetness about Dahl's works. You always sort of have the rough and the smooth.
I suppose it's somebody that didn't want to cover all the life up with comfort and lies. Life does have hard things happen in it.
Yeah.
So he wanted you to know that. If you go into the woods, you'll get eaten by the wolf. If you have something bad happen, it doesn't always come out good.
Yeah, this is the old tradition of European folk tales and fairy tales, where shit happens. And you don't cover it from kids that shit happens.
People kind of want to protect their kids from all the ugliness in the world.
I think, perhaps part of it is to do with the fact that the world has indeed become uglier. And it's to shield them from the fact that the world is ugly, so we have to have sanitized tales. Perhaps it's that. I don't know.
Yeah. Even if it's instinctive rather than a deliberate thought. Yeah.
It's like someone once asked me, could be going back to Mjolnir magazine, about what they could include in it. And they said, what about tragedy? Because that's particularly European, and it's true. And I said, but you can't write tragedy in an age that's truly tragic because it loses its meaning. The problem is that the worst things have happened.
It's just a drop in the ocean compared to what's around you.
Yeah. That's right. And so I suppose if you're writing particularly to galvanize a people, then you have to have something uplifting. You have to have something like epic.
Yes. You kind of need to have that happy ending. Although, a happy ending, that makes sense, hopefully.
Yeah. What about other aspects of the film? The special effects, for example.
Yeah, the standout scene with the meeting, that was superb. The makeup in that and the masks.
Yeah, that scared me too, especially when the head witch takes her mask off and she looks like, I don't even know how to describe like a wrinkled vulture.
Yeah.
That's true, yeah.
Even with the hairy wart on the nose, it's perfect.
Yeah, it's sort of an archetype of a witch, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And Angelica, the actress, she does a great job changing her body language to suit it into this witchy form. It's great but acting under the makeup as well.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
That's right.
And
Angelica Houston really does a good job here.
Yeah. And the mouse transformation from the boy to mouse, you see twice, of course, that's impressive and to children quite scary. That whole process is quite disturbing. Just the right amount of disturbing not to freak them out too much, I'd hope. But as a kid, that would scare you.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, this
did.
was the Jim Henson Creature Shop, wasn't it?
Yeah.
When Jim Henson was still alive and directing the place as well. And for me, it's diminished since he died, unfortunately. But he certainly did a lot of great stuff when he was alive. A lot of the
Incredible
effects.
talent. And it really shows you what you can do with practical effects. There's nothing in that would have got improved with CGI. Everything there was real and just done with kind of older style effects. And it was great. That could be upscaled to whatever definition you like, and it'll still look good because it was all real.
That's right. I mean, it had to be at that point, of course, because we're really sort of pre-CGI 1990. But still, I think that would look better than CGI.
Well,
I
think about
agree.
the Matrix, how the effects in that have dated. Well, the effects in this haven't.
Yeah, we've mentioned it quite a number of times, of course, the dating of the effects around the year 2000, and it's true. Although there was a good film called Mouse Hunt. I don't know if you've ever watched Mouse Hunt.
Don't recall.
It's with Lee Evans, the British comedian. And
I think I know the film you mean. Yep.
yeah, Christopher Walken's in it as well
That's
as the
right.
mouse exterminator and plays an absolutely wonderful role. But the CGI of the mouse in that, I think, is actually very good. So I can't be too critical on CGI, but still I think that the most desirable, especially when you're making it look as though they've got character and so on, is with animatronics.
It's a case of there's no harm in CGI when it's needed. And that's the trouble now, that because it's there and it's now got so cheap, it's now just used all the time.
Yeah, and that's really unfortunate.
Yeah, I mean, you can get varying qualities of it, of course. I mean, there are some that look really like a computer game almost, and others which look extremely good. So it's a difficult one, but I think that the problem is that we've got a lot of films that are looking more and more like computer games these days.
There's too much influences crossed over both ways, because I've heard of folk in the gaming world complaining that the games are becoming like films.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, you've got a complete crossover. That's right.
Because you got a lot of people in the making games that clearly wish they had the ability to get into the directing world.
Yeah, that wouldn't surprise me at all. Now, let's get on to the narrative here. What do you reckon to the narrative, the storyline itself?
Well, it's been years since I've actually seen the movie, but what I remember was, so there's these witches, and they, for whatever reason, hate children and, want to get rid of them. Never quite understood that.
It's quite a simple story, really. It's hard. The whole, even taking the narrative of the film is quite rather than the background of it, it's still quite a simple story. Kid goes to the hotel, uncovers the plot, and so on. Not a lot to it, really, but it's well told.
It is, and that's the thing. The trick is in the telling, and so on, and the sense of adventure.
Yes.
Especially after the main protagonist, the child, is turned into a mouse.
And the way as well, it's told in a way that it was, especially again, this is aimed at kids, so it's an adventure that a kid could almost imagine actually having. No kid.
Yeah.
I mean, a kid could read The Hobbit and Lord of the Rings and love it, but he's never really going to be seeing Balrogs and adventuring across the Shire or anywhere else. But maybe sometime he'll be at a hotel and see a witch, because a witch just has odd characteristics. Like pinching the nose and all these other things that could be quite innocuous in real life.
Well, of course, the difference between Tolkien and Dahl is that Dahl tends to always set his books in the real world. Although, you can go into alternate dimensions, if you like, or whatever, like in the BFG. But
it was still grounded in England, though.
That's right, yeah. Generally speaking, you're in England or another European country, because this is partly set in Norway, of course, is the witches. His grandmother is Norwegian, is the boys. I think that's very much a personal decision by Dahl. I think that is very much a retelling of the relationship that he had with his own grandmother, and with her relating stories and so on.
You imagine that's probably where he got his interest and talent in it?
I think so, yeah. Because he used to go and see his grandmother, especially after the age of 10, because they moved away from Wales. And also his father died young as well. You get that a lot in Dahl's novels about the parents being killed off early.
That was in The Witches too. I think like in the very beginning of the movie, the parents have a car accident or something, so the boy goes to live with his grandmother.
Yeah, that's right, yeah. What's interesting as well, I think, is that this film got slated by feminists.
Oh.
Did it?
Yeah. The feminist lobby did not like this film at all.
Even though the grandmother was I'd have thought, a very good, strong character.
Exactly, yeah. But I think that it's the type of woman that they were interested in. There was a big backlash about the portrayal of women in this film. But as you say, you've got a very strong female lead in the grandmother. But she's a trad woman, isn't she? to a degree, anyway. You know, she's a cigar smoker and so on. But
I was thinking this too. Why are they complaining? Because the witches aren't really women. They're almost like these bizarre creatures.
Yeah, they're not even really human, are they? They're entirely different other thing.
Yeah, like they have to wear masks, and once they take off their masks, they're just like these hideous things. So they're not even humans. So what really is the feminists' issue here?
Well, I personally think it's the fact that they're modern women, and they're very much posited as modern women. They wear, the most contemporary clothes. They're fashion conscious. Even in the film, particularly in the film, actually, that's brought out very well. But Dahl really does mention this.
Do you think it's because the witches hate children?
Yeah, I think so. But I think there's something else to it as well. And that is the question of ethnicity.
Silence.
Because, yes. Did you sort of pick up on that?
No, I did not.
Well, Dahl, shall we say, was not a Philo-Semite. He, in fact, he made some big statements about particularly Israel, the state of Israel, which he detested and was open about it, and that he didn't like Jews very much at all, and he in fact called himself an anti-Semite.
I seem to remember there was a bit of controversy not long ago, wasn't it, in the media and the usual darlings?
About 5 years ago, they wanted to put him on a collection of stamps, if I remember right. They wanted to use his works as the basis for a collection of Royal Mail stamps, and they refused because there was an uproar by the Jewish lobby. And it's interesting, actually, that they've tried to discredit him as an author, that his works are not that good. Because he was an anti-Semite.
This is, of course, how they start off with that and then reason backwards from that point.
Yeah, exactly. You know, there's no mention of someone like Philip Roth, for example, who they regard as a wonderful author, even though he hates Gentiles, and it's always bubbling beneath the surface how much he hates Gentiles. But that's never mentioned. But because Dahl didn't like the Jews very much, all of a sudden his works are not that good.
Yeah, despite the fact that the litmus test has proven that they are great.
Yeah, absolutely. And as I say, I regard these as some of the greatest works in history, in the history of children's fiction. And even reading them as an adult, I think that the thing is that as an adult you can still relate to them.
Like that bit you mentioned with the grandmother speaking at the end. I mean, that as an adult has a whole other thing that would affect you.
That's right, yeah. And the dark humour as well that appeals both to children and to adults. And the fact that they have eternal truths in them. But yeah...
I think Dahl, when he was writing, he's writing something that you could imagine people will still be hearing about, like the Grimm fairy tales, like The Little Mermaid. He was writing a quality, I think, that could be remembered like that. That's what he was aiming for. While most of these kids' books are just trash to get Hollywood version made, and then plenty license money, and then they retire somewhere hot.
Yeah.
I don't think they're really looking to make something for the ages.
That's right, absolutely. Now, to return to this theme of, shall we say, his point about the Jews in the work, because you may think that that's just an arbitrary thing that I've said. Well, there are a few giveaways, particularly in the novel, but also in the film, because they haven't changed that much in the film. The grandmother, she talks about, look for the nose holes, my grandmother said. Witches have slightly larger nose holes than ordinary people. But the other interesting thing is that they're bald and that they wear wigs, both in the novel and in the film. Now, there is only one culture on Earth that I know of where the women shave their hair and wear wigs, and that is Hasidic Jews.
It's a remarkable coincidence.
It is a remarkable coincidence. And so then you kind of go, "Ooh, I see," because the thing is that when you're an author and you've got a bee in your bonnet, you do tend to put it in your work. But yeah, I don't know. Personally, I think that the novel is far better than the film. I think that the film cops out at the end. I think that that's the major problem with the film.
And as a child reading these things, it's not an unsatisfying book, as endless children would have testified, so they didn't need to change the ending. Children would have been happy with it. It was already a successful children's book.
Yeah, that's right.
You notice as well that their cover for the meeting was a children's charity. And I thought, how interesting that they have a cover of a children's charity for child predators, when all the stuff that's been coming out in recent years about predators using children's charities as cover in a way to get access to them.
So do you think Roald Dahl knew something, or, it's just a good bit of imagination on his part?
That'll chase the witches away.
Yes. Speaking of children, we have one with us. You see, there are no witches here.
Yes, say hello.
I think that he was probably aware of that kind of thing. Certainly Dickens mentioned it. So, as he was a fan of Dickens, because of course you've got Oliver Twist, where you've got this Fagin who's, if you like, grooming children as a sort of charity almost, but he's also using them to do criminal acts.
Yeah, it's disturbing to think about, because that stuff does go on in real life.
Well, you've also got to remember there was plenty of legendary stories of things that happened to kids in certain areas. There was maybe backlashes, or it was remembered in poems, songs, and so on in histories. So these things were prior to Dahl as well. This idea of predators using certain covers or pretending to be, and sort of angels themselves, and then something would happen. Children would be discovered dead or harmed.
Yeah, there is this idea, I think, in there of the blood libel. I mean, is it really libelous? Because there were a number, and I mean an inordinate number of cases throughout Europe that were reported of Jews kidnapping children and ritually sacrificing them.
It's really weird, because if it were just in one place, okay, fine, but it's like in multiple different countries. Like there's, obviously it's in the UK, but I think there's even blood libel as far as Russia, even.
Yeah, I've read 2 or 3 cases specifically from there.
Yeah,
and you think, especially remember back then, these things were usually very local when they did come out and people reacted. So people didn't travel far or talk far. I mean, medieval times or even later, nobody knew. So, somebody in England wouldn't know somebody in Russia and discuss between them some conspiracy or their opinions.
No.
It's a modern phenomenon, so these things had to happen independently.
That's right, and there were even two different churches because, of course, in Russia you have the Orthodox Church, and in the West it's the Catholic Church. So they wouldn't have communicated really because they actually didn't like each other very much at all.
Yeah, after they had, I think it's called the Great Schism, and I can't remember the year, but
There were a number of schisms.
yeah.
But yeah, I mean, the most famous case in Britain was the case of Hugh of Lincoln, which was made into several different poems. In fact, I've got them collected here in volume 3, I think it is, of Child's English and Scottish ballads, which Francis James Child is the editor of the collection. He brought the collection together. This was, as I say, a big theme in the medieval period. Of course, it later got discredited, really, through the fact that Jewish power has taken over. But certainly someone like Sir Richard Francis Burton was reporting in the late 19th century this was still going on. I think that with Epstein and so on, this is still going on.
That Epstein case is really disturbing.
The problem is that if it was some black in Africa, you would think that that was possible. But we have this idea that the Jews are civilized, and they're not.
Yeah.
Well, look at the cases with Corey Feldman and other ones that in Hollywood, even their sort of own, have definitely been abused and things happen. And then what looks to me like a cover-up and threats.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, bear in mind, of course, that Corey Feldman is himself Jewish. So we're not saying that all Jews do this, and we're not saying that there are no Jewish victims.
Yeah, there's a clique which for some reason has power and influence.
Yeah. And get very much into this kind of thing. Now, going back to the children's charity, I mean, it's called in the film, and I'm not sure in the book, I can't remember if it's the same in the book, but it's called the RSPCC, which seems to be an amalgam of the NSPCC, which is the National Society for the Protection of Children. The protection of cruelty to children. Prevention from cruelty to children. Sorry.
Yeah, they're not trying to protect the ability to be cruel to them.
Right. Prevention, which is the Royal Society for Prevention of Cruelty to Animals. So they've amalgamated the two there.
I was going to say, it almost sounds like here in the U.S., I'm sure we have something similar, but we have something called the CPS, which is Child Protective Services. And they're the ones, if the child is being abused or neglected or whatever, then they come and take your child away and put them
but
in foster
that'll be
care.
a government thing, won't it?
Yeah.
What Dave's talking about is a charity. It's like a charity that sort of helps and raises awareness.
Yeah.
Like animal shelters do, it's like that, but helping kids instead.
Yeah.
Well, here it'd be social services or something like that would be get involved if there was a known provable case of abuse. They would come and deal with it, and then the police probably.
Yeah. I think it's interesting that they've amalgamated the two things, the NSPCC and the RSPCA, because of course the children get turned into mice. So you have the prevention from cruelty to children and the prevention from cruelty to animals at the same time there. So that's quite interesting. There's this charity in Britain called Childline, which I'm sure you're aware of. And one of the patrons of Childline is Esther Rantzen, a particular very famous Jewish TV presenter in Britain. And there are a lot of allegations about her. And in fact, back in, I think it was 1994, she allowed a paedophile to stay in her house while she was on holiday. And apparently nasty things went on there. And yet, as I say, there are other people who've made allegations that she has supplied children, but yet there never seems to be a whiff of an investigation.
Notice she get sidelined from the limelight.
How has she avoided being arrested? Because if it were anybody else, they would have been in prison by now.
Well, just look at the politicians we know who are doing stuff, yet they got to die old age.
Yeah,
and you can't tell me that police and MI5 and all the rest of them didn't know what was going on, especially with somebody so prominent.
Yeah. When there was the scandal that came out about Jimmy Savile, She claimed never to have met him, never to have known him, and so on. And yet there is a very famous picture of her with Jimmy Savile, obviously extremely friendly with him because he's got the Jim will fix it badge around his neck, and she's there biting on it. And that's, as I say, I'll find that picture out and perhaps we can just throw it in there.
Yeah.
But she's obviously been in contact with these kind of people, and it's amazing how often.
Yeah.
She kind of reminds me of Maxine Ghislaine. Was that guy's Epstein's girlfriend who helped him procure young girls. She, by the way, has not been arrested or had any investigations into her either, so...
Well, that happens a lot as well with these cases where even if they do have one case that has to be looked at or investigated, everything around them never gets touched. They never go after the Johns in a child prostitution case. They never find out about all the contacts and other people involved in these circles. They just seem to only deal with what they absolutely have to deal with and just pretend everything else is fine, which is nonsense. Yeah. Like with Jimmy Savile.
So basically they throw the public a bone and to pretend like, they're doing something.
That's it. Well, with him, they waited till he died of old age, even though it was public knowledge, basically, albeit suppressed. And then everybody pretended they had nothing to do with it and he was totally innocent, even though he was doing stuff with kids in public.
Yeah. I actually met Jimmy Savile,
Oh!
Yep. Okay. When I was a kid, I met Jimmy Savile in Scarborough because he had an apartment in Scarborough. And he used to jog up, from one bay to the other. That was his regular little run when he was in Scarborough. My father collared him and said, "Oh, hey, Jim," because we didn't know at that time, of course, and said, "Go on, kids, come and have your photo taken with Jimmy Savile." And me and my brother went, "Nah, you're all right."
I hope that hurt him a bit.
Oh my God! So looking back on it now, do you?
Yeah, I had a lucky game there actually. So I've met him, but he's never had his dirty hands on me. So there we go. Now, the other thing which is rather disturbing about the descendants of Roald Dahl, because he had a number of children. I think he had 5 in all, but one of his daughters died when she was a child of some kind of disease or another, which was terribly unfortunate, and it affected him quite profoundly. And he turned away from the church at that point as well. Really sort of became quite anti-Christian after a particular minister told him that, I think it was an ex-archbishop of Canterbury actually, told him that the dog that the child had would not be able to go to heaven.
Oh, that's so cruel. Why would he say that?
Exactly, but this is typical Church of England vicar, or in this case, an archbishop. But his children have become shitlibs, basically. And his daughter Tessa Dahl, she was friends with Gary Glitter. And there is a very famous clip that you can watch on YouTube of Gary Glitter with Tessa Dahl. And it's on This Is Your Life, which was a program in England where famous people were brought into the studio. They were surprised by either Eamon Holmes or Michael Aspel, depending on what era it was, who was the presenter. And he used to bring in all these different people from various parts of their lives to come and meet him and so on. And as I say, one of them was Tessa Dahl. Tessa Dahl came in, and she was talking about how she would bring schoolgirls over to the house where basically Gary was staying with Tessa Dahl in her house, and she brought schoolgirls over to see him, and you can see he's putting his finger to his lips and going shh, shh.
And of course, with what's come out, obviously, after that, the fact that he was rampant pedo.
Yeah, absolutely. As I say, you can watch that clip on YouTube. And as you say, Gary Glitter is a notorious paedophile and has been charged in prison. I think I think he's been in prison twice, hasn't he?
I think it was, yeah. There was even that. Remember that documentary? Mockumentary, I should say, about hanging him.
Yeah, they should hang him, to be quite.
Yeah, but I mean that just shows you how notorious he became.
Yeah, absolutely. But I think it's awful, and it's terrible when you think of Dahl, the author, who was always concerned about the welfare of children, and his own daughter being involved in.
So you're not going to wonder sometimes if somebody takes some sick joy in deliberately perverting these things or aiming for this. I've got to wonder some of these cases where this happens.
Yeah.
Oh,
it's like some sort of spiteful attack.
Mm.
I'm sure it does, and I would like to add to that. I really don't feel that a parent can be blamed if, a child turns out badly, because sometimes, parents do the best they can and kids still come out, quite bad.
Oh, yeah.
So, has anyone anything else to add? I think we should leave it on a more positive note than that, actually, shouldn't we?
Well, I think there's the fact that it's actually a very fun film that children and adults can enjoy. It's a good balance of serious and humour.
I'm afraid I'm going to have to leave it on a more negative point, actually, because they're actually remaking it.
Are they?
Oh.
Why?
Yeah.
It's perfectly good as is.
It is, that's right. In fact, Robert Zemeckis is remaking it. The guy who made Back to the Future films, among other things.
Yeah.
Now, guess what ethnicity the child is in the new version, which is due for release next year?
Go on.
Black.
Yeah. And so we have yet another case of blackwashing.
So how's this going to work with a Norwegian grandmother?
You know what? This is why we boycott these films.
Yeah.
We don't give them our money.
Yeah. It's interesting that all these black actors and so on, and these black lobby groups and Black Lives Matter and all that kind of stuff, they're always talking about whitewashing, about whites taking the roles of black people. But how many times have you noticed this? Because I haven't really, but it seems to be happening an awful lot the other way around.
They made Julius Caesar black. They made Sir Lancelot black. They made Joan of Arc black. They've made Margaret of Anjou black.
Yep. Nick Fury, very famously. Heimdall, very famously.
Yep. Yes.
Which one was it from the story of Troy? They also made black as well. One of them.
Oh, Achilles.
That was it. Yep.
Yep.
Yeah. I'm trying to think who else.
Hercules. Dwayne Johnson has played him.
Oh, yep.
There's just so many. It's hard to remember them all.
So,
Guinevere, the wife of King Arthur,
That's
they made
right.
her black too.
So I think that we've got to start talking about blackwashing a lot more.
Well,
Yes.
you've got to wonder how many native African stories by Africans, for Africans, their folklore has been completely replaced with white people and presented. I can't remember any.
Well, the thing is, why are they taking our narratives?
Yeah. Why aren't they writing their own?
Why aren't they filming their own? That's right.
Because they don't have their own.
Well, they've got all the tools to make it.
That's
I
right.
mean-
They could make Wakanda if they wanted.
Yeah,
Yes.
please do.
Except that that's a Jewish narrative, of course. And this is the problem, I think, that actually what blacks should be looking at is why haven't they got their own narrative? And who in fact is in charge of their own narrative?
No.
It's not white people.
Mm.
And when they get to the bottom of that, to the people who've been running the NAACP for decade after decade, and who are setting up their lobbies, and who are directing them and pushing them in certain directions where they want to see them go, they might get to the answers of why they haven't got their own narrative.
And why, when you think before the particular turnaround in the 60s, why did blacks back then have huge, compared to now, levels of business ownership, their own stock exchange for blacks and so on? That's power. That is real life independence.
And they had their marriages were pretty stable. They didn't have all these single moms like they do now.
All the negative stereotypes that they have now and realised were far less a problem back then for them.
Yeah.
So what's the benefit of the changes that have been made? Even just for them? Obviously not our concern, but for them, they should be concerned.
Yeah.
That's right. I'm concerned for us, basically, because obviously they're taking over our narratives, but this is not good for us, but it's not good for them either.
No, it's not good for any. Well, I shouldn't say anybody.
Well, it might be good for the people who the witches are. But interestingly, of course, these people in folklore, the witches of folklore, are indeed based on certain ethnicities of people. The same with tales of vampires and so on.
And did you notice that the witches had unlimited access to money? That was one of their routes to
Yes.
success.
Yes, that's right.
They could just get as much as you like, buy everything for 3 times what it's worth for this worthless money.
Yes, that's right. And of course, they're philanthropists, because they're always philanthropists, aren't they? These people like George Soros, the billionaire philanthropist, as he's known as.
He is kind of like the male version of the witches, isn't he?
Yeah.
He's got the face for it.
Oh,
So I would stick with this version of The Witches, and when it comes to the one being released next year, let us turn our backs on it. Let us let it bomb, as so many are at the moment. And one thing that I'm glad about seeing is how Hollywood is creating films that no one wants to see.
It's awesome.
and might even be better than we suspected with the current rumours about and whistleblowing about Disney and so on. It looks like there's been a lot of, shall we say, creative accountancy in boosting the profits for these films. So perhaps the claims of many of these films being in profit is fictitious, which would be a very interesting discovery.
That would.
They can't lie to the shareholders forever.
No, they cannot. So, would you say that if somebody has children, it would be a good idea to sit them down and watch this film and discuss some of these ideas in a child-appropriate way, of course?
Yeah, I think what would be better is them actually reading the book.
Yes.
I mean, that was the purpose of a lot of these old stories, was to get across important lessons in a child-friendly way.
Yeah.
Warning you about strangers, don't trust everybody like you would your own family.
Absolutely.
I will say one thing about this movie. It did actually made me, as a child, I did not want to go anywhere alone. You know, I either had to have my parents or an older child or even children my own age, but always in a group. I never wanted to be anywhere alone.
Yeah.
So I guess the movie did one thing good for me.
Yeah, keeps you safe.
Well, yeah, it teaches an old lesson very well, I think, which we were always taught as kids, which was never go off with strangers.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's a basic lesson, but it can save a lot of heartbreak.
Yeah. And I think that that's a good message to end things on. So I will say goodbye to James and Hannah.
And goodbye to my little nephew. Say bye-bye.
And goodbye, yes, and goodbye to Hannah's little nephew. Goodbye.
Goodbye.
Bye.